Good morning, Fieldstone. It's Tuesday, May 19th. It's Mr. Lent again from the Rising Stars. Today we're going to do a similar assignment that you did yesterday. Instead of it being on the north, we're going to be focusing on the south, and this will help us wrap up with our sectionalism unit, and then that'll help us carry over also into our next couple of topics, which will be about social reforms and then ultimately the Civil War. Okay, so just like yesterday, you guys will all receive a Google form, the same one that I'm showing you right here. Again, it's a 10-point assignment, same layout. There are 8 multiple choice questions, and then there's the 2-point claim and evidence writing response. And just like you did yesterday, you can simply click on the link here. That'll redirect you to the slideshow that I'm going to go through with you right now. And then when we're finished here, I'm going to go back and we'll go through each question one by one in a little bit more detail. Okay, so let us discuss the world of the South, social and economic aspects. As you can see, the picture on the right is representing the South. Okay, much different than the picture on the left there. So we will be focusing on agriculture. If you take a look at the highlighted information, okay, I read you guys the top yesterday. I'm going to read you the bottom. The South relied on slave labor and a plantation system that produced cotton, tobacco, and rice as major cash crops to be sold. A small percentage of white plantation owners controlled the economy. Most Southerners were small farmers who could not afford slaves. Slavery increased due to demand for cotton, and new laws called slave codes further limited their rights. Okay, so this is going to be the focus for what we talk about today with the South. Okay, so the first pictures you see here are 2 of cotton plantations. One is an artist rendering, and the other is an actual photograph. Okay, cotton will become the cash crop of the South in the 1800s, and unfortunately, as a result of cash crop cotton becoming the king cash crop, slavery is going to increase. And you can see in the picture here, we have, just like the map yesterday, all of the major crops and resources of the South. Tobacco is still the focus cash crop here in places like Virginia, North Carolina. But as you can see, cotton is starting to spread, and it's spreading westward. Okay, as we eventually annex states like Texas, the land will be used primarily for cotton growing, and as you can see here, for cattle raising. Those are the 2 main focuses of the economy in the South. Now, back to cotton. This one machine that was invented, ironically, by a man named Eli Whitney, who was a northerner from Connecticut, called the cotton gin. Before cotton gin was invented, the cotton seeds had to be picked slowly out of the cotton fibers, which made it time-consuming, which made it a very expensive product to use for things like clothing. Then the cotton gin comes around, and as you can see, all they do is dump the raw cotton into the machine, turn the crank, goes through a series of hooks and brushes, and then the clean cotton is pushed out the opposite side. This machine could do what several hands in the field could do at one time. Now cotton will become much cheaper to process. It will become a cheap, easy material to use for clothing. And as a result, farmers in the South are going to begin to purchase more and more land in order to grow cotton. Thousands of acres will be used just by one plantation in some respects to grow cotton. Unfortunately for slaves in the South, right around the time that the cotton gin was being invented, the whole concept of slavery was actually starting to die out. Slavery was actually decreasing. But unfortunately, the cotton gin comes along and that changes everything. As you can see from the 2 graphs here, there's a direct relationship between cotton production between 1800 and 1860 and the growth of slavery. As one goes up, notice that the other one is going up almost in lockstep. So the more cotton that's produced, the more slaves are needed. The more slaves that you had, the more cotton you could produce. It becomes a vicious cycle. And as a result, in the South, we have a region which becomes known as the Cotton Kingdom or the Black Belt. Now, it wasn't called the Black Belt because of the enslaved Africans that were working the fields. It was because of the rich black soil, primarily around the Mississippi River Valley, which is where the largest concentration of your plantations is going to be. There was one county, Natchez County in Mississippi, that actually had the largest concentration of what would be known as millionaires in the United States, right here between Alabama and Louisiana, or Mississippi and Louisiana, I'm sorry, all because of New Orleans here, which was still the key port city in the South. So cotton production is becoming king. And this is really going to influence society in the South as well. So all of these dots here represent all the clusters of cotton production. Notice the largest concentrations, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, all along the Mississippi River here. Now, this map on the right today represents the different counties in the states in the South, and the blue represent the largest concentrations of where African Americans live today. Notice 1860, where cotton was being produced, slave labor being used. Even today, the African Americans that were enslaved in those areas still live in the largest, tightest clusters in those same areas. Here's a breakdown of Southern society. Ironically, well, it's not really ironic, but people should understand that most whites did not own slaves. It was only a small percentage of the white population that were slave owners. Slaves were expensive. As a result of cotton becoming much more productive, a slave went from costing only a few $100s to anywhere from $1,000 to over $2,000, depending on if it was a male, a female, or a child. Most white people were too poor enough to even own slaves, so more than half of the population did not own slaves. Okay? Only a small percentage owned slaves. 16% owned at least one, 8% owned 5 or more, and then if you were to even cut a little sliver off at the top here, the 1%, they were the ones that really owned most of the slaves, 50 or more. In some cases, a couple of hundred slaves might be owned, but they were expensive, which means that if you owned slaves, you were considered very wealthy. Okay, and here's how the wealthy lived. They became known as what we call the cottonocracy. Okay? They were the plantation owners. They were the ones that controlled society. They controlled the economy. And they were the usually ones, if they weren't in politics, they were listened to very carefully by the politicians. Okay? This was the smallest percentage. These would be the 1%ers in our society today. Lived in extravagant mansions, bought most of their clothing, their furniture, their possessions from Europe, which is why when we start talking about how the North wants to put taxes on imported goods called tariffs, this causes a big issue because Northerners wanted everybody to buy domestic-made goods, but the Southerners that were wealthy felt that it was part of their culture to buy imported goods because it made them look richer or more distinguished. And then here's how the other half lived, the slaves in the South. Over 30% of the population, or close to 4 million people, men, women, and children, were enslaved African Americans living in the South. Property here, guys, not people. As you can see in the picture in the top left, they're literally being auctioned off. The slave purchasers would literally come up to them and inspect them like a jockey would inspect a horse, inspecting their teeth, their ears, their eyes, their muscle tone, their height. Okay? Women would be surveyed as well for the house. Many of them would become house servants. However, the majority would be field slaves. Fathers were separated from their children, mothers separated from their children, husbands from their wives, brothers from sisters, and this was considered the norm. Okay? A lot of people in the South, whites, looked at slaves as you would livestock. And there was a lack of humility, and it was very inhumane. Okay? Slaves slept in tight quarters while their plantation owner lived a life of luxury and privilege. They were beyond what would be considered poverty today. Okay? As time goes on, slavery becomes worse. The whip is used as a form of discipline. Runaway slaves would be, quote unquote, disciplined as a result. Now, some slaves did try to run away. Others did try to revolt, which led to the passing of what we call slave codes. These were a series of laws that further limited or restricted the rights of enslaved African Americans in the South. And some of the more common ones, slaves were not allowed to congregate in larger groups. They were not allowed to own any possessions because they themselves were considered possessions. They were not allowed to be taught to read or write. Um, it was even illegal to kill a slave unless the slave resisted. Now, you think about resisting arrest, there's a fine line there. Most slave owners would not want to kill their slaves because that was something that they purchased. And to kill their slave would mean that they'd be out of money. It wasn't so much about the well being, but it was that they were their property. So most slaves were actually treated similar to a person would treat a piece of property, livestock, things of that nature. Okay, but unfortunately, as time goes on in the South, as the 1800s roll, slavery will get worse, and that will ultimately lead some people, primarily from the North, to want to call for an end of slavery, known as abolition. And that'll be one of the things that we'll be focusing on in the next couple of days. Okay, so if we go back to the assignment, what you'll now do is use the information from the slides that I just showed you. And again, anytime you need to, you can go back and click on the link here to bring you back to the slideshow. And you have your 8 multiple choice questions, and then your short response. Okay, so the first question, you can use slide 3 to identify what type of economy we have in the South. For slide 4, you want to use the information to tell us which statement best describes the economy in the South. Okay, you're going to use the map and all the information that's there on slide 4. Okay, which claim below is best supported by the information on slides 5 and 6. Okay, take a look at slides 5 and 6. That has to deal with the cotton gin and cotton production. Okay, what conclusion can be made based on the information in the bar graphs on slide 6? That's the one about cotton production and the growth of slavery. There was something that I mentioned about both of them. Take a look at the bar graphs and see what the relationship is. Okay, which statement below best summarizes the cause and effect relationship in the 2 maps on slide 7? The 2 maps that we're talking about here are the clusters of cotton production and the map that I showed you that has all of the blue counties representing where African Americans live in the South today. Okay, cause and effect relationship. One is from 1860, one is from more recent. Okay, which claim below is best supported by the information in the graphic organizer on slide 8? That is the pyramid graphic organizer. Okay, the images on slide 9, which statement below best describes life of the cottonocracy? So that's the one about the plantation owners. Okay, so those images, take a look at them. Which statement below best describes what life was like for a Southern plantation owner that was part of the upper class? Slides 10 through 12. Okay, which piece of evidence below best supports the following claim? Enslaved African Americans in the South lived a life of fear, poverty, and abuse. Which one of these statements helps to support that claim? And then your last task, I've given you once again a claim here, and you're going to state 2 pieces of evidence that you can use to support this claim. The evolution of cotton as a major cash crop had a great effect on the southern states economically and socially. Okay, so we're looking for 2 pieces of supporting evidence. You may want to give us 1 economic piece of evidence, 1 social piece of evidence. You could talk about cotton itself as a crop. You could talk about its impact on slavery. You could talk about its impact on wealth and status in the South. Okay, but you need to give 2 supporting pieces of evidence. Also, you need to give the slide number. Many of you forgot to do that yesterday. Be sure, in order to get the full credit, to put the slide number so that we know where you got the information and what your piece of evidence is from that slide. And also, don't forget, when you're done, click on submit and you are done for the day. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. I hope all are well. Have a great Memorial Day next Monday. And also, I hope you have a great rest of your week. Take care now.